In today's video, we'll look at 3 groups of people who seemingly vanished into thin air. But before that, we want to bring you a word from our sponsor, Magellan TV, which is the best streaming service for documentaries. Recently, I watched a great documentary series on Magellan TV called Deadly Dates. The series details cases of people who were looking for love online only to be killed. Magellan TV is run by filmmakers, and Deadly Dates is just one of thousands of documentaries that they have available for streaming. Magellan TV also has history documentaries about some of the evilest people who ever lived. This ranges from demented killers to brutal dictators. Magellan TV also has some fascinating documentaries that are available in 4K. The documentaries are also ad-free. Magellan TV is easy to access. It can be watched anywhere at any time on your TV, laptop, or mobile device. It works on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, and iOS, and you can even cast from your phone to your television. Right now, Magellan TV has a special offer for criminally listed viewers. Just go to try.magellantv.com/criminallylisted and you'll get a month free. So get access to thousands of great documentaries and help Criminally Listed in the process by checking out Magellan TV. Number 3. Sarah Boyd, Kimberly Boyd, and Linda McCourt. In the spring of 1987, Sarah Boyd was 32 years old. She was living in Harleyville, South Carolina with her husband, Philip Boyd, and their 2.5-year-old daughter, Kimberly. On the night of April 3, 1987, Sarah and her friend, 32-year-old Linda McCourt, attended a gospel concert at a church in Walterboro, South Carolina. Walterboro was about 30 miles from their home in Harleyville, South Carolina. They were driving a blue Lincoln that was owned by McCourt's husband. They brought Sarah's daughter, Kimberly, with them. Sarah, Kimberly, and McCourt were all seen at the concert between 10:30 and 11 p.m. At around midnight, Linda McCourt's husband returned home from work, and he was surprised to find that his wife was not home yet. At first, he was not too concerned. He just assumed she was at the Boyd's home or she was with a relative. But hours went by and she didn't return home. So he reported them missing that morning. Someone reported seeing a blue Lincoln traveling on Route 15 on the night Sarah, Kimberly, and McCourt went missing. The car was seen traveling between Walterboro and Kennedy, South Carolina. The motorist was driving under the speed limit and another car was following it. But the witness could not remember anything about the second car and they did not get a good look at the driver. The day after the trio was reported missing, the police were notified that a blue Lincoln had been abandoned on the outskirts of Holly Hill, South Carolina. The person gave the police the license plate number and they learned that the car belonged to Linda McCourt's husband. An officer drove McCourt's husband out to the car to retrieve it. They opened the hood and discovered that a freezer plug had been blown out and the engine had overheated. When the car was discovered, the police did not consider the disappearance of the trio a crime, so the car was not examined for evidence. What was odd was the location where the car was found. After the trio didn't return home, the assumption was that they were traveling in the car and they started to have engine trouble. This would explain why they were driving slowly. The car broke down, then they left their vehicle to go call for help. Then something might have happened to them after they left the car. What was strange was that the women were driving north from Walterboro to their home in Harleyville. But for some reason, their car was found immobile less than 15 miles north of Harleyville. If they abandoned the car in that area because it wasn't working, they would have either driven past Harleyville or one of the highways that led to Harleyville. Why would they drive nearly 15 miles past their home? This is even odder if the women really were having car problems within 10 miles of Walterboro. The police also thought that if the car broke down, they would have called someone for help. But no one had heard from the women. The police conducted several land and air searches, but no other trace of the women or the toddler were found. The FBI was also brought in to aid in the investigation. The authorities thought that, because of the circumstances, Sarah, Kimberly, and McCourt were victims of foul play. But they could not find any evidence that anything violent happened to the three females. In fact, besides the car, the police found nothing else of interest. A few weeks after the disappearance, one officer admitted that they were grasping at straws. Months and then years went by, and no trace of Sarah Boyd, her daughter Kimberly, and her friend, Linda McCourt, were found. Then, in 1990, about 3 years after the mass disappearance, someone used Sarah Boyd's credit card at a mall not far from her home. When the credit card was used, the police were notified. They checked the credit card slip and there was a signature. However, it was illegible and it did not match Sarah's signature. The police are not sure if the person who used the credit card had anything to do with the disappearance of the three females. For example, someone may have just found it and used it. Regardless, the credit card was never used again. It's also a mystery what happened to the card after it was used. Some people believe that the remains of 2-year-old Kimberly Boyd have already been found. On December 21st, 1988, the body of a young girl was found on the side of a dirt road near Waycross, Georgia. Waycross is about 220 miles from the area where the car was abandoned. It is believed that the girl was about 3 or 4 years old. She was wearing a white pullover shirt with a red pony stitched onto the upper left chest area and pajama pants. The medical examiner was not able to determine the cause of death. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to hide the body. It had been wrapped in a brown blanket and placed in a gym bag. The bag was put into a steel suitcase and then cement was poured into the suitcase. The suitcase was placed into a TV console and then the console was boarded up with plywood. People have noted the physical similarities between Kimberly Boyd and the girl known as Baby Jane Doe. They also noted that Baby Jane Doe was encased in cement and Kimberly's father worked in construction, so he had access to cement. But not everyone is convinced that the girl is Kimberly. Notably, Baby Jane Doe had been dead for about 1 to 2 months before her body was found. Her body was found about 20 months after Kimberly Boyd went missing. But people point out that Kimberly only went missing then, and there was no evidence that she was killed at that time. She could have been kept alive up until a few months before the body of Baby Jane Doe was found. The police have never publicly spoken about the possibility of Baby Jane Doe being Kimberly Boyd. In 2017, the police released a new 3D model of Baby Jane Doe's head in the hopes that someone might recognize her. The disappearance of Sarah Boyd, her daughter Kimberly, and her friend Linda McCourt is considered cold. The police are hoping for a break in the case, but they have very little physical evidence to suggest what might have happened to the trio. If they are alive today, Sarah Boyd and Linda McCourt would be 64, and Kimberly Boyd would be 32, which is the age her mother was when they went missing. Number 2. The Martins. In 1958, the Martin family lived in Portland, Oregon. Kenneth Martin, who was 54 years old, and his wife, 48-year-old Barbara, had 4 children. Donald was 28, Barbie was 14, Virginia 13, and Susan 11. In December 1958, Donald was serving in the Navy, and he was stationed in New York. On the night of December 6, Kenneth and Barbara attended a Christmas party. No one noticed anything off about the couple. Kenneth and Barbara returned home that night. The next afternoon, Kenneth, Barbara, and their 3 daughters piled into their 1954 Ford Country Squire. They had told people they were planning on driving out to the Columbia River Gorge to collect greenery to make Christmas decorations. The next morning, Kenneth did not show up for work. His employer thought that this was very strange because Kenneth was incredibly reliable. The girls' schools also noted that the girls were absent. That night, a friend of the family called the police and reported them missing. Officers went to the area where the family had planned to look for greenery. It was dark, so they only conducted a quick search. Meanwhile, other officers went to the family's home with some friends of the family. They found nothing out of sorts, and by all appearances, it seemed that the family planned on returning. Hundreds of volunteers looked for the 5 missing members of the Martin family. But notably, the eldest Martin child, 28-year-old Donald, did not return home to join the searches. One problem that the investigators had was that they couldn't find any evidence that the family actually made it to the Columbia River Gorge on the day they went missing. They told people that they were going there, but they could have stopped anywhere along the way. Or they could have simply changed their plans and went in a completely different direction. So they didn't even know what area would be best to search. On December 23, 1958, a little over 2 weeks after the family went missing, a credit card bill arrived at the family's home. On the day the family went missing, the credit card was used to buy gas in a small town called Cascade Locks, which is near the gorge. The police received a lot of calls from people who said that they saw the family. Several people recalled seeing a family that matched the description of the Martins at a restaurant in Hood River. A waitress said she was sure she had served the family burgers and fries. They spent about an hour in the restaurant and left at about 4:30. Several other people also reported seeing the family in the restaurant around the time the waitress said she had served them dinner. The family was traveling eastward. If it was the Martins who stopped at the restaurant, that would indicate that they were driving back home. Then in January 1959, a few weeks after the family disappeared, a man who was looking for traces of the family was searching a bluff near the Dalles Dam. He found tire tracks in the dirt that led off the bluff. There were also some white paint chips found on a rock near the tire tracks. It looked like a vehicle had either driven over or was pushed over the bluff into the Columbia River. Then, weeks later, on January 18th, a handgun was found under a rock in Cascade Locks. The butt of the gun was damaged and it was covered in blood. Someone who saw the gun thought it looked like it had been used to club something or someone to death. The serial number of the gun had been filed off. The lead detective on the case, Walter Graven, was able to trace the gun back to a sporting goods store in Portland. In September 1955, an employee had been accused of stealing about $2,000 worth of merchandise, and the gun was one of the items he was accused of stealing. When the employee was confronted about the theft, he admitted that he stole the items. The employee was Donald Martin, the eldest of the Martin children. It turned out that Donald had a strained relationship with his family. He said that it stemmed from the fact that he was gay and his parents did not accept his lifestyle. He also said that his parents were fat slobs and his sisters were going to turn out just like them. In May 1959, about 6 months after the Martins disappeared, a tugboat was in the area where the tire tracks were found on the bluff. They dropped a 2-ton anchor and they heard it hit something that was metal. They looked, and on the floor of the river, there was an object that was about the size of a car. Then they saw what they thought were clothes rise to the surface, and then the clothes were taken away with the current. A scuba diver was sent into the river where the tugboat operators thought that the car was located. But the scuba diver nearly died, so the search was called off. Days later, on May 4th, 1959, some men working on a tugboat near Camas, Washington, found the body of a young girl floating in the Columbia River. It turned out to be the body of the youngest Martin, Susan. The next day, floating in a spillway about 25 miles from Susan's body, the body of another young girl was found. Her body was found near Cascade Locks, which is where the family got gas. With the help of dental records, the body was identified as Virginia, the second youngest Martin. The medical examiner said that the cause of death for both girls was drowning. But this ruling is inaccurate. For drowning to be the official cause of death, all other causes of death needed to be ruled out. This couldn't happen because of the state of the remains. Drowning was put down as the cause of death because it was the most probable cause of death since the girls were found in the river. A sheriff's deputy who photographed the bodies noted that both girls had identical holes in their heads above and behind their right ears. The medical examiner was able to examine the stomach contents of both girls. Within 2 hours of their deaths, they had eaten burgers and fries. This seemed to verify the witnesses' accounts that the family had stopped for dinner in Hood River. The lead detective on the case, Walter Graven, noted that witnesses said that 2 ex-convicts, Roy Light and Lester Price, were also in the restaurant when the family was there. They left the restaurant around the same time as the family. A stolen car that was driven by the 2 men was found abandoned in Cascade Locks after the family disappeared. The car was parked a short distance away from where the gun was found. Detective Graven knew that Donald could not have killed his family because he was over 3,000 miles away when they disappeared. Detective Graven did suspect that Donald had them arranged to be killed. Not only did Donald not like his family, but with all of them dead, he was the sole inheritor of their estate. Donald Martin came back to the area for the first time in June 1959, over 7 months after his family went missing. He had planned on attending the memorial service for his sisters, but there was apparently a scheduling problem, and he arrived in Portland the day after the service. Detective Graven questioned Donald, and he could not think of anyone who would want to hurt his family. He also couldn't see how his father could have accidentally driven off a cliff. Detective Graven wrote a report about everything he had found, and he concluded that the family most likely met with foul play. But his superiors were not convinced. They thought that the Martins had just died in a tragic accident, and they decided to close the case. Donald Martin was never charged in connection with the deaths of his sisters and the disappearances of his parents and his third sister. Donald Martin died at the age of 66 in July 2003. If he was involved in the murders of his family, he took that secret to the grave with him. The bodies of Kenneth Martin, his wife Barbara, and their daughter Barbie have never been found. It's assumed that they are deceased. Number 1. The Salomons. In 1970, Saul Salomon immigrated from Israel to Los Angeles, California. He was 23 years old, and he had been a commando in the Israeli army. After he relocated to Los Angeles, he drove a taxi. He eventually got a job selling encyclopedias. A year after Saul moved to Los Angeles, he was in a bar in Hollywood, and he met 28-year-old Elaine Marlowitz. Elaine worked as a beautician. Not too long ago, she had divorced her husband after 7 years of marriage. Elaine had a daughter from the marriage, 3-year-old Michelle. After that initial meeting, Elaine and Saul started dating. A year later, they were married. A year after that, Elaine gave birth to a son, Mitchell. Saul eventually became a naturalized citizen. He also started his own company that refilled fire extinguishers. The business was successful, and in 1987, the family bought a house in Northridge, California. The family liked to spend their money. They dined at fine restaurants, and they always had the newest gadgets. They also owned a Mercedes-Benz and a Rolls-Royce. In the autumn of 1982, by most appearances, things were going well for the family. Saul was 35 years old, and his business was doing well. His wife, Elaine, was 39 years old, his stepdaughter, Michelle, was 15, and his son Mitchell was 9. On October 12, 1982, Saul left the family's home, supposedly to go to a car auction with a man named Harvey Rader. Rader, who had moved to the United States from England, owned a car dealership called Mr. Motor. Hours later, Saul had not returned home. Around 11:30 p.m., Elaine was on the phone with a friend. The doorbell rang, and Elaine told her friend that Harvey was at the door. She then hung up the phone. The next day, the neighbor who lived behind the Salomons called a family who lived on their street. She said that the Salomons' pool was overflowing and flooding her backyard. She did not know the Salomons, but the family she was calling did know them. She wanted them to go talk to the Salomons. So they made their way over and found no one home. The family owned 3 vehicles, a Rolls-Royce, a Mercedes-Benz, and a white work van that Saul used for his business. The Mercedes and the van were parked in the driveway, but the Rolls-Royce was gone. The doors were all locked, and there were no lights on in the house. They went around to the backyard, and the pool was indeed flooding. The family's garden hose was on, and it was in the pool. The family's dog was also tied up in the backyard. The neighbors thought that the scene was strange. They went home and called some mutual friends and neighbors. No one had seen or heard from any of the Salomons that day. Elaine volunteered at a clinic and she didn't show up or call to say that she wasn't coming in. Michelle and Mitchell also didn't attend school that day. The neighbors decided to call the police. The police arrived at the family's home and they found no signs of a break-in or forced entry. When they got inside the home and started searching, they were disturbed by what they found. In 15-year-old Michelle's bedroom, the bed was broken and some bedding was missing. There were also some bloodstains on the wall. Later, the chief of police was asked how much blood was found. He said it was more blood than he would want to lose. A piece of the carpet in Melissa's bedroom had been cut out and a bath mat had been placed over it. A baseball bat was also found near the family's bar. One thing that the police noted was that all the beds were made. Several people who knew the family thought that this was incredibly odd because the family never made their beds. Because of what they found in the home, the police suspected that the family had been victims of foul play. 4 days later, a road worker found some personal belongings of the family scattered along a freeway near Acton, California. This included family photos, their wallets, and their passports. There was some speculation that the family was killed by the Israeli mafia. There were also rumors that Saul might have been involved in the sale of illegal firearms. But it wasn't long before the police began to suspect that Harvey Rader might have been involved in the family's disappearance. It turned out that Saul had invested $20,000 into Rader's business, Mr. Motor. Also, the family's missing Rolls-Royce was found in Rader's possession. Rader was interviewed by the police. He denied that Saul had invested money with him. He also said he had no idea what happened to the family. Rader did admit that he saw some of the family members on the day they went missing. He said that he had picked up Saul at his home at 6 o'clock that evening and he had taken him to a car auction. Afterward, he dropped Saul off at an Israeli restaurant. Rader said that after that, he went over to Saul's house to pick up the Rolls-Royce because he had to do some maintenance on it. That was why he had it in his possession. Rader said that when he got to the Salomons' home, he said hello to Elaine, but when he left in the Rolls-Royce, she was alive and well. The police investigated Rader's story and they found several problems with it. First, Rader said that he picked up Saul at 6 p.m. and then they went to the auction. But the police checked and the auction ended at 5 p.m. Afterward, Rader said he dropped Saul off at an Israeli restaurant. It turned out that the restaurant was closed that night. The police were already familiar with Harvey Rader. In fact, Saul and his family were not the only people who had business dealings with Harvey Rader who went missing in 1982. Rader moved to the United States from England in 1978. He first lived in California's San Fernando Valley with another man who had also moved from England to the United States. They lived together for about 6 months. The roommate worked as a chauffeur for a sheik. In January 1980, the sheik's mansion in Beverly Hills caught fire and arson was suspected. Specifically, the police thought that Rader and his roommates started the fire to cover up the theft of some artwork. Rader was not charged with anything, but his roommate was. The roommate ended up pleading guilty to grand theft. In a civil trial that followed the conviction, Rader admitted that he had helped his roommate in the burglary. An art dealer was charged with buying some of the sheik's stolen artwork. Rader was granted immunity to testify against the art dealer. At the trial, the art dealer testified that he asked Rader where he got the artwork from, and Rader told him it had been stolen. After the trials, Rader started his own business, Mr. Motor, which sold and repaired foreign cars. One of his clients was 54-year-old Peter Davis. Peter had also immigrated from England. By most appearances, Peter was a used car and antique dealer. He bought and sold luxury cars with Rader. But Peter was also involved in some shady business, like dealing in stolen artwork. He was also apparently involved in the sale of stolen guns and jewelry. On May 17, 1982, Peter and his 47-year-old wife, Joan Davis, went missing. When the police got inside their home, they found dinner was still cooking on the stove. The Davis' car was later found abandoned at the airport. Friends of the couple noticed that a valuable painting was missing from their home. The police decided to talk to the man who lived in the house next door to the Davises. The Davises also owned that home, and the man who lived there rented from them. The man's name was actually Paul. Paul was Harvey Rader's cousin. Paul had worked as a salesman for Peter, but he had quit to work for his cousin. Paul told the police that on the day the Davises went missing, he had dropped Peter off at home. The police determined that Paul was the last person to see Peter Davis before he went missing. The police had Ashley Paul take a polygraph exam. He denied having any knowledge about what happened to the Davises. The polygraph examiner determined that he was being deceptive. But after the polygraph exam, Paul and his cousin, Rader, stopped cooperating with the police. Then 7 months later, the Salomons went missing, and Rader was the last person to see them. While the police thought that Paul and Rader may have been involved in the disappearance of 6 people, they could not prove anything. So their investigation stalled. Ashley Paul then moved back to his native England. Elaine Salomon's mother was frustrated with the police investigation, so she hired a private detective. The private detective traveled to England several times and encouraged Ashley Paul to confess to his part in the disappearances. But Paul refused to divulge any information. Then a detective with the LAPD flew out to England and talked to Paul. Once again, Paul denied knowing anything about the disappearance. Then in November 1983, just over a year after the Salomons went missing, Paul went to Scotland Yard and started talking to a detective. At first, Paul only admitted that he was present during the murders of Peter Davis and Saul Salomon. He said that his cousin, Harvey Rader, had shot them both in the head. He claimed he did not know that his cousin was going to kill the 2 men. Paul did not explain what happened to the women and children. The Scotland Yard detective talked to the LAPD detective and told him what Paul had said. The district attorney granted Paul immunity in exchange for the truth about what happened to the Salomons and the Davises. For the next 3 days, Paul talked to the Scotland Yard detective and told him about the murders of the Davises and the Salomons. He said that they went over to the Davises' home because his cousin wanted to look at a Corvette that Peter had in his possession. Paul explained that he was shocked when his cousin shot Peter in the head. Paul said that after Rader shot Peter, he started walking home, which was next door to the Davises' home. Along the way, he passed Joan Davis and said nothing to her. Paul said the next day he helped Rader bury the bodies next to Interstate 5. He said that 7 months later, when Saul Salomon was killed, he was with his cousin, another car dealer, and 2 Italian men whose names he didn't know. Once again, his cousin surprised him by shooting Saul in the head. They put Saul's body into the trunk of the Rolls Royce. After the murder, the other car dealer went home. Paul said that he, Rader, and the 2 Italian men went to the Salomon home. When they got there, Rader went into the house alone. 15 minutes later, he came back outside. Then Rader had the 2 Italian men go inside the house with him. Then Rader and the 2 men came outside with the 3 bodies wrapped in blankets. They placed the bodies in the trunk of the car. Rader went back into the home for a 3rd time and stole some items. He also took a receipt, and he was apparently quite happy that he had found it. The police think that the receipt is the one Rader wrote out for Saul's investment in his business. Paul claimed that the next day he watched Rader and the 2 Italian men bury the bodies off an interstate near Acton, California. Acton is close to where the family's wallets and passports were found. Paul also told the detectives that his cousin had committed a 7th murder. He said he had killed 27-year-old businessman Ronald Adib. In January 1982, about 4 months before the Davises went missing, Adib had told his family he was going to meet a man to discuss some luxury foreign cars. Ronald Adib was never seen again. The police learned that, like Saul Salomon, Adib had invested money with Rader. The police concluded that Saul and Adib may have asked for their money back, and Rader either didn't have the money or didn't want to give it back to them, so he killed them instead. Rader then killed Saul's family because he considered them witnesses. After confessing, Ashley Paul voluntarily traveled back to the United States. When he did, his cousin, Harvey Rader, was arrested. The police drove Paul out to the places where he said the bodies were buried, but they did not find any human remains. However, Paul did lead them to an area where some bedsheets were buried. Friends and family of the Salomon were shown the bedsheets, and they said that it might have come from the family's home. The bedsheets were the only items of interest that were found. Although Ashley Paul had been granted immunity, the district attorney decided to revoke the immunity and charge him with the murders of the family. They revoked it because they did not think that Paul was telling them the truth. They also released Rader from custody. Paul then told the police a new story regarding the disappearances. He admitted that he knew beforehand that his cousin was going to kill Peter Davis and the Salomons. He also said that he was in the Salomon home on the night of the murders. He admitted that he lied about the other auto dealer and the 2 Italian men being present during the murders. He said that he and Rader worked alone. Rader had ordered him to collect valuables in a garbage bag. Paul said that Harvey killed Elaine by hitting her head into the family's marble-top bar. He then bludgeoned Mitchell with a baseball bat, and he strangled Michelle. A judge later dismissed the charges against Paul because his immunity had been improperly revoked. After that, Ashley Paul went back to England and he never returned to the United States. His current whereabouts are unknown. Without Paul, there was not much of a case against Rader. The police could not even prove that the Davises, the Salomons, and Ronald Deeb were dead. In December 1986, Harvey Rader was deported. When he immigrated to the United States, he said he did not have a criminal record. But he actually had 13 convictions, including theft, possession of a firearm, and stealing a motor vehicle. Months later, Rader illegally re-entered the United States and he tried to get a fake passport. Rader was arrested, and in August 1987, he pleaded guilty to making a false passport application. He was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in a federal penitentiary. Then in August 1988, just after Harvey Rader was released from prison, he was charged with the murders of the Salomons. His trial started in May 1989. All the evidence against him was circumstantial. The trial lasted for 2 months. The jury deliberated for 3.5 weeks, but they could not come to a unanimous decision. The vote was deadlocked at 11-1 to convict. The judge declared a mistrial. Harvey Rader went to trial again in January 1990. The star witness for the prosecution was another auto dealer who had been in one of Rader's cars after the Salomons disappeared, and he said he saw a bloodstain in the car. However, the judge discovered that the witness was facing a drunk driving charge, and Rader's defense lawyer was representing him in that case. The judge considered this to be a conflict of interest, so he declared a mistrial a day after the trial began. Harvey Rader went to trial for the murders of the Salomons for a third time in May 1992. The trial lasted for 2 months. Once again, there was no physical evidence that Rader murdered the family. Their remains had not been found, so there was no evidence that they were even dead. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They ultimately found Rader not guilty on all charges. It's unclear what happened to Harvey Rader after the trial. Anyone who associated with him during his trials has lost contact with him. His current whereabouts are unknown. The whereabouts of Ronald Deeb, the Davises, and the Salomons are also a mystery. Many people, particularly those who worked on the case, think that Harvey Rader got away with 7 murders. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. You can also check us out on Roku and Facebook. The links are in the description box below this video. Also, please check out criminallist.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. But that is all for today. Thank you again for watching.